All right, thank you everyone, and thanks so much for joining. We're about to begin session 5, Archival Materials and Language Vitality, discussion part 1. Where this is going to be virtual and in person. So we appreciate having PT Anderson up here, who will be co-moderating this session. Our first guest will be Eva Garroutte. Let me see if I can. Sorry, a fun amount of things to DJ at the same time. So Eva Garroutte is an enrolled citizen of Cherokee Nation who received her PhD in sociology from Princeton University in 1993.
Hi.
We have somebody off mute. Dr. Garroutte devoted her subsequent career teaching to the departments of sociology and the programs in American Indian Studies at the University of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and at Boston College, Massachusetts. She has held an additional faculty position at the Native Elder Research Center at the University of Colorado, Denver, Washington State University, serving its mission of training American Indian PhDs and MDs to design and conduct research in advancing tribal health. Her publication history takes in issues related to Native American Indian identity, health, and culture. She is a past appointee of the Greater Tulsa Area Indian Affairs Commission. Now semi-retired, Dr. Garroutte resides on the Cherokee Reservation in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, while retaining the position of Research Associate Professor of Sociology at Boston College. Ongoing work includes a series of collaborative biographies with American Indian people. More recently, she has begun to focus on the translation of 19th and 20th century archival documents from Cherokee into English with linguistic annotation. She volunteers related services and serves on the board of Digital Archive of American Indian Language Preservation and Perseverance at Northeastern University in Massachusetts. So Eva, thank you so much for joining, and welcome to start.
Oh, thank you. OCO, Eva Garroutte, Dalato. Hello, my name is Eva Garroutte. And next slide, please.
If you'd like to try clicking on your screen, I think you can advance them.
Nope, it's not letting me. So with respect and honor, I acknowledge that this meeting is being held within the ancestral homelands of the Lenape people, the original inhabitants of Delaware, New Jersey, Eastern Pennsylvania, and Southern New York. So to start, I'm a Cherokee Nation citizen, but I'm neither a first language speaker or a tribally certified language teacher. I'm a second language learner, and it's from that perspective that I want to share with you some ideas about how archival documents, like those you can find at the American Philosophical Society, have been useful to my own learning, and what that might suggest about a possible role for those documents in language instruction. So, while I've been an enrolled citizen of my tribe since I was a kid, it wasn't until I was in grad school that I really started thinking through the reality that because I really value my ethnic background, I probably ought to consider my responsibility as a Cherokee person. And my problem at the time is I'm in grad school, so there I am in New Jersey, and my tribe's in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. So what did I have that would let me contribute to the tribe that had agreed to claim me? And the only thing I can figure out at the time is I could try to learn the language. So I got myself a textbook and some audio tapes, and I began to try. So fast forward to 2024, I'm still trying, right? And I have confronted certain challenges along the way. So here's a short list. Next slide. First off, learning any language requires sustained effort. I found I could learn the Cherokee syllabary rather easily. Next slide. And incidentally, so can you. It's 85 characters. It's not rocket science. Just get a book. Next slide. Or if you want to study the syllabary together with other people, there's online venues where you can do that. And I'll give you the information on a slide at the end of the presentation, but you can definitely do this. So I got my head around the syllabary, and then I was at the point where I could read, but I had no idea what I was reading. I'm still trying to maintain effort though, so I started in trying to do what everybody does, which is memorize lists of nouns from my audio tape. Again, possible, you can do that. Then next, the books I was using at that time started presenting me with phrases to memorize, which I tried to do. But at some point, it occurred to me, suppose that I do commit to memory some particular phrase, like, I see a brown dog. Then what's my plan? Am I just supposed to hang about in the vicinity of brown dogs, waiting for someone to come along and ask me about them? And worse yet, supposing my carefully conceived plan works and I get to deliver my sentence. What am I going to say next? I'm not even going to be able to add anything to this sparkling repartee with a further comment on the brown dog I saw yesterday and the one that I hope I will see tomorrow. So gradually it dawned on me, I need to look seriously at verbs. And that, for me, was where everything went to perdition. Because Cherokee verbs are the most complicated but most important element of the Cherokee language. Let me show you. Next slide. This is a table from a very useful book by Wyman Kirk, who now heads up the Cherokee Language Immersion School here in Tahlequah. And this table shows 5 tenses of the verb go, such as I'm going or I went. It also shows the form of the verb that we'd use if we wanted to show the different persons doing the action of the verb. If you wanted to say, I'm going, you're going, they're going, and so on. Now look around that table. Do you think you could memorize all those forms of the word go? You know, like maybe if you tried really hard, but there's worse news. This table doesn't show all the possible forms of the word go. There's a bunch more. Indeed, if you have accounted for all the possible changes that you can make to any one Cherokee verb, it's estimated that that one verb can take upwards of 12,000 forms. And that's one verb. So, of course, you can't memorize all that. But here's the good news. You can learn the patterns by which verbs get made. Those patterns are called the grammar of a language. Once you know the patterns, you can understand and predict how verbs have to change to show different persons, tenses, all of these different subtle shades of meaning. Grammar is really your instruction manual for how our language works. Once you know the patterns, you can just keep using the same tricks over and over for different verbs. And best of all, when you get on top of some grammar, you can decipher a verb even if you've never heard it before. Also make new verb forms whenever you need them. So when I found that out, I'm like, brown dogs of America, look out. I am a-coming to talk about you in every possible way. Of course, first I had to actually study some grammar, but realistically, I will admit that grammatical treatises may not make for the most scintillating reading. In fact, you'd kind of be forgiven if you wondered what you could actually do with obscure information about, say, the names of all the different Cherokee parts of speech by which you could make those 12,000 verb forms. And it doesn't help that Cherokee is a tonal language, and different linguists who write about the grammar of the language, use all these different systems for explaining and writing out the various tones that words use when they get pronounced. Next slide. So for me, all this added up to a second thing on my list of learning challenges, which is that grammar texts can be kind of off-putting and make you wonder if it's really worth dealing with them. Even if you can believe in theory that you need to, those sources can be kind of hard to keep working at. Next slide. And then, at the same time, as I was trying to shore up my motivation in the face of the understanding that, oh my word, now I have to start reading grammar texts, I started getting whacked over the head with the realization that conversational fluency takes some time to develop. Because, see, at some point I've moved back here to Oklahoma to the Cherokee Reservation, meaning that, unlike back then when I was living on the East Coast, there are actually fluent speakers around here. And I quickly discovered I can't really talk to them. So I had packed a bit of language into my head by that time, but I didn't think fast enough to follow a conversation. And as soon as a speaker used a word I didn't know, which was all the time, then I'd get derailed. So even though I'd been studying this stuff for years, I wasn't conversational. And I never questioned that conversational fluency was the entire goal of language study. So I was confronted with failure over and over. And I really wanted to be able to contribute to the preservation of my Cherokee language, because by this time I see how really important it is. But it just felt like this was going to be a much longer term goal than I had realized at first. So discouraging. And then I got a hold of some archival documents, and that was a discovery that really spoke to all of my problems. I was talking about that challenge of sustaining effort. Well, the thing is, advanced slide, old documents are just really sexy. Aren't you dying to know what this letter from 1920 says? And you might want to know even more if I told you that a direct descendant of Elias Boudinot, who was a prominent, perhaps notorious historical figure in the tribe, depending on your point of view. Anyway, Elias Boudinot's descendant gave this to me for translation a couple of years ago, after he found it among some family papers. It mentions, among other things, Abraham Lincoln. How's that for motivating? This is the sort of thing that you can find in archives that will really hold your attention. Next slide. Here's a bit of printed material, a fascinating little Cherokee language tract from the Temperance era titled The Evil of Intoxicating Liquor. The gentleman on the cover seems caught in the act of flinging furniture at his defenseless wife and children. Don't you want to know what the text inside can reveal about what Cherokees thought about issues related to alcohol in their communities in 1842? Next slide. Then here's a historical account that mentions the Trail of Tears, all carefully written out by a Cherokee school teacher, probably about 100 years after the fact in the 1940s. More mysteries. And this document's actually in the APS archives. So these are just a few examples of the sorts of documents that you can find in archives. And most of them have never been translated. If you're anything like me, the ravening need to know what documents like this say is a great way to shore up any flagging motivation that might afflict you about learning the language. And if you require further allure, there's always the possibility that if Cherokee language learners start to poke around in archival documents, they will find a personal connection. Next slide. Take the collections at the American Philosophical Society, for instance. When I started looking around there, I was lucky enough to find there were quite a number of items that turned out to have been handwritten or audio recorded by a relative of mine named Molly Cummingdeer Terrapin, who was born in 1870. It was just really exciting to see some personal narratives that she had written. That document on the previous slide actually comes from her. And whenever Native people get involved in archives, it's always possible that we will find evidence of people or communities known to us. So there's another reason why documents can really capture learners' attention. Another thing about archival documents, they gave me a really good kick in the pants when it came to studying grammar. For one thing, you have to know some grammar in order to translate documents. There is no other way in for us second language learners. And in addition, those documents gave me some immediate context for applying what I've learned about grammar. Struggling with those documents will send you back to the grammatical literature over and over. But in that case, you're on a mission. You are looking for specific answers, not just assembling random facts from grammar. So there's a real clear reason for knowing stuff that otherwise can be hard to take in. And there is a fun aspect to all of this. What grammatical study teaches you is that Cherokee verbs are built up out of smaller units called morphemes, because every individual morpheme means something. You can separate them and look at them individually, and that is a process called parsing. Now, Cherokee verbs can contain many morphemes, and linguists love those morphemes so much that they have given every one of them its own name, because a Cherokee verb can contain a whole series of morphemes. Parsing asks you to write a little label for that name of the morpheme under each morpheme. And having done that, you'll be able to figure out just exactly what a verb means and why. You can see at a glance why words that might differ by only a sound or two can actually mean something very different. You'll see the morpheme that is responsible for that difference. And to me, again, as a second language learner, parsing verbs is like working a puzzle. You really have to figure things out by reconstructing the logic that made that verb. And if you're the sort of person that gets satisfaction about a place for everything and everything in its place, parsing Cherokee verbs is just the thing for you. So satisfying. So cast aside your Sudoku books, everybody. Parsing Cherokee verbs is way more fun. And it's also the way you build the skills you need to translate archival documents. The kind of grammatical analysis that you must do in order to parse verbs is what makes you able to decipher them, even if you've never seen that particular word before. So most importantly, as I got to the point where I could work on translating archival documents, I got this thunderbolt. This is a valuable thing to do. And admittedly, even now, I can't participate in a Cherokee conversation. But if I can sit and study a document, if I can refer to my grammar texts, if I can take the time to look up words I don't know, it's possible for me to do some translation. And I realized that work was a contribution to saving our languages too. Just as much as becoming conversational is a contribution. Just think about it. Our ancestors wrote stuff down because they thought those things were important. And by translating their documents, you can become the vehicle by which they can speak again. It's kind of huge. And I'm not telling you that conversational fluency is important. I'm not telling you you shouldn't try to get there. I hope I get there. But for me, that's turned out to be a longer term goal. Only now I'm not discouraged, because in the meanwhile, there's this other way I can make myself useful to our language and culture. Now, I'm still working on my skills in documentary translation too, but I'm pleased to tell you this. Next slide. I do have my first actual publication of a translated archival Cherokee language document coming out in the next issue of an international Indigenous Studies professional journal. And I wrote that with my up-and-coming junior colleague, Tanner Scott, who found the particular document we translated in an archive, a newspaper archive. It's from an 1828 issue of the Cherokee Phoenix. One of the goals Tanner and I had for our publication was not just to present the translation, but also to talk about the grammatical analysis of all the verbs in a way that would be accessible to second language learners, people like us. We wanted readers really to be able to see what we were doing and why that kind of analysis is useful. So you can look for that forthcoming article, read the book, don't wait for the movie. But for now, do note the title. Next slide. Did I not tell you that old documents are sexy? You want to know what this 1828 news article says, especially since the other thing that the newspaper issue that it appeared in was dedicated to was the very first printing of the Cherokee tribe's brand new written constitution. So why is this hugely important new governing document accompanied by this little article entitled Two Cats and a Monkey? I'm not telling you have to read the publication. So, in summary, why are archival documents a great thing to add to Cherokee language learning instruction? Next slide. Because they are so sexy. Because they provide context to apply hard-won grammatical knowledge, and because they help preserve a Cherokee language, or help preserve Cherokee language via a goal that can at least complement a longer-term goal of conversational fluency. So, next slide. If you are interested in a grammatical approach to language learning, there's a growing number of free resources for Cherokee language. These are all electronic, so you can take advantage of them from any place just by hopping on Zoom. And the study groups are all just starting out right now after a summer break. So this is the best time for you to join them. So the information that shows up on the next slide, which please advance, also appears in handouts that you've got. But also I'll just say at a beginning level, there are these two groups associated with the Cherokee community of Puget Sound, which is a satellite organization of the Cherokee Nation. They both use a workbook that I wrote that asks students to focus on the particular morphemes that attach to verbs to show the different people who can do an action, the pronouns, in other words, and then to practice swapping out those morphemes to make different verbs. It also teaches students how to make negative sentences and questions. So your handouts also include a couple of pages from that workbook so you can see some exemplary exercises of what students can learn to do. Next slide. There's also a study group called Chalakis-Kadoogie, the Cherokee community, that operates at a more intermediate level. And then there's a more advanced group that I convene as a book club. We're now studying a really terrific grammar textbook by Brad Montgomery Anderson. And this group is one where we really get into that whole parsing thing in earnest, and we have a good time. Next slide. And this slide shows you something different. This slide describes a mini grammar crash course that I teach occasionally online over 4 Saturday mornings. I try to make it somewhat entertaining, but it's basically this kind of goofy on-ramp for the more sober Cherokee grammar book club described on the last slide. The crash course helps people who probably have some prior experience in the language to get where they can start to do work at the higher level of the textbook that we use in the Grammar Book Club. I'm going to teach this mini course again starting next November 4th for 4 alternate Saturdays. And those 4 Saturdays are designed to get you to the point where you will be able to translate a short story from Cherokee with what you learned. Well, usually each meeting is 2 or 3 hours. So if you're interested, email me immediately after at the address on your handouts, and I'll get you advanced materials to start November 2nd on that little course. Next slide. If you prefer a less structured self-study, there's a new resource in the form of the Digital Archive of Indigenous Language Persistence, or DELP. This online archive of handwritten Cherokee syllabary documents lets you view many historic documents in their original syllabary form, their translated form, and their parsed forms. You'll also find a variety of curricular materials there. Next slide. And this is DELP's own slide. Next slide. So in closing, thank you for listening to that, and I hope to talk with anyone who wants to build skills necessary to translating the many Cherokee language written documents that now reside in archives like the American Philosophical Society. And thank you to them for curating that important resource. That's all.
Thank you so much, Ava. I'm sitting in a room just away, and I just heard the applause from the other room. So thanks so much for such a great presentation. Next up, we have Alex FireThunder. So glad to have you today. Before I introduce Alex, I just wanted to make a plea to our online presenters, but then also for any other presenters going forward. Our interpreters are trying their best to make this bilingually accessible. So we're asking presenters to pause a little bit as they're speaking to make sure we have space for the interpreters to catch up with everyone. So I'm going to try to model that as I introduce Alex FireThunder. Alex FireThunder is the Lakota Studies Department Chair at Oglala Lakota College. As an enrolled member of the Oglala Lakota Nation, Alex brings a wealth of experience to his role, holding a BSW in social work, MA in Lakota leadership, and a Lakota language certificate from Oglala Lakota College. A seasoned educator, Alex has taught the Lakota language to students from pre-K to the college level for 10 years. A musician and NAMI award-winning song composer, he founded Oglala, a platform for promoting Lakota language content. Alex believes in the transformative power of language in shaping a strong Lakota identity. So Alex, so great to have you, and take it away.
Thank you. Wopila Chichielo. Let me share my screen again here and make sure everything looks right. How's that look on your guys' end? Awesome.
It looks great.
How me daku api le me cha Alex FireThunder machiapolo honaha lecha Lakota makoche ektawa you can Oglala Lakota oyate el omapha honaha inawa ke Debbie FireThunder chiapi naha atewa ke Bram Lobe chiapi hocha wakia kheta tiwahe etahan wahi honaha mitra tios ba ke oyanke wan skok ba ea chajiatapi hetahapi chamija hel etahan wahi ash hel matumpishni na hel imachacheshni New York hel matumpina imachache chadoksha he iwowagalaki talo. So real quick, I just briefly introduce myself in my Lakota language. I'll later on in the presentation, I'll kind of get into my background. But real briefly, my name is Alex FireThunder, as she said. I reside here in Kyle, South Dakota, on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. And yeah, I'm happy to talk to you guys today about strengthening Lakota kinship systems, and as well as language and culture resurgence through archive exploration. So I'm going to start out, like I said, I'll get to a little bit of my background and who I am a little bit more in the presentation, but first off, I'd like to just give a brief history of what our people have kind of went through. And I know this is a kind of a common story throughout indigenous communities across North America and really honestly, probably around the globe. But things play out a little differently in each community. So for us Lakota people in South Dakota, we experienced first was removal from our land, and we didn't necessarily, it wasn't necessarily entirely physical all the time the way that it was for a lot of other tribes with the Indian removal, Trail of Tears, and those types of things. So we're still within our traditional homelands, within the boundaries. However, things like the extermination of our food source, like the buffalo, that was a removal from the way of life on the land that we had. And then also, while we're still within our traditional boundaries, we ended up having to live a different lifestyle, sedentary, with actual boundaries that keep us within those. And that's very separate from the relationship that we have with the land. So removal from land is talking about all aspects of disconnect from the traditional relationship that our ancestors once had with the land. Then we also experienced, as many other indigenous communities experienced, especially in US and Canada, was the removal of our children from our families and our communities into residential schools or boarding schools. And some of those were church run and some of those were government run. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about specifically the Carlisle Indian School, which is over there in Pennsylvania. And then another aspect of colonialism that we've experienced has been the fragmenting of land and of our communities, and all the way down into our family structures, which is the extended family, the Tioshpaye. And so as a result of the Dawes Act. Can you guys hear me still? I think I'm frozen. Okay. As a result of the Dawes Act, we were given a land allotments instead of sharing land communally and all existing together as a large community, and then as little smaller communities. Within these land allotments, they assigned each nuclear family an allotment of land, and sometimes that divided nuclear families that were within one extended family community would sometimes be allotted land in different communities geographically. And so that was a huge, fragment. And then on the large scale, the Lakota speaking tribes and people were all, coexisted separately, but together. And when we were given these reservation boundaries, we were all put on different reservations. So we're on Pine Ridge. To the east of us is the Rosebud Indian Reservation. To the north of us is the Cheyenne River Indian Reservation. And then to the north of them is the Standing Rock Indian Reservation. And then to the east are a number of Dakota-speaking tribal peoples. And so when they divided us all in the early reservation era, there was a reservation superintendent, and you had to get permission from that superintendent in order to leave your reservation boundaries. And so, just because we're from different bands, oftentimes we have relatives from other bands because you would marry out. And so in order to go visit a relative, in order to attend a funeral or some kind of event or doing, you would have to get permission from the government Indian agent. And So you can just imagine, you know, all these fragments and isolating different peoples into different groups of Lakota bands down into Lakota communities, down into Lakota nuclear families, which that really put a rupture into our the way our culture works, the way our kinship systems work, the way our language is spoken, you know, dividing people. So okay, so that's kind of a brief, real brief background of our people and the experiences we've had in the last 200 years of colonialism. And now we're you know, we're pretty far out west, and we were like one of the last tribes to be, you know, still chasing buffalo and trying to live the good life. And so we were, you know, a lot of other tribes experienced these things way earlier on. And so I also understand how fortunate we are to still have many of the things that we do have. But now I'm going to talk about my story. So this is where you'll learn a little bit about me. And I'm going to try to speak slowly, but also try to move quickly, because I know we have limited time and I have a lot to share. So, and I'm also a talker, so I apologize. So my journey. So I actually grew up, I was born and raised in New York. My dad is from upstate New York. So I grew up in a little tiny town named Afton, New York, which is on Interstate 88, actually, between Binghamton, New York and Oneonta, New York. And so being born and raised there, I was very geographically disconnected from my community and my people. However, culturally, I was still, like, I always knew who I was, and I always knew where I came from. And every summer we would make this trip on I-90 back home to South Dakota. And so I'm very grateful for having that opportunity and having that upbringing. And we'd have, you know, we practice Lakota ceremonies and things at home in New York even. And so, you know, on the weekends, I'd always look forward to the weekends when I get to go to different powwows and Native events, and not always Lakota necessarily, but, you know, I got to know, I think Ava mentioned the Lenape people. I've powwow danced and sang with some of the Lenape people there in New Jersey. The last time I was in Philadelphia was actually in 2013 for the UPenn powwow. So I got to know the East Coast powwow circuit and all that stuff growing up. My education was kind of tough. I was not just the only Native person at my school, I was the only minority at all. Until I think in high school there was a Puerto Rican family that moved up from the city. And so I always, you know, felt out of place. I felt, you know, I didn't see myself reflected in my schooling and in my education. And so I always kind of felt lost. And I actually ended up dropping out of high school on 10th grade. And I hit the powwow trail hard. I was really into powwow singing and dancing. So I did that. But then after a while, I realized that I did need an education and I needed to do something with my life. And I couldn't just, you know, live off of powwow dancing and singing. Probably could, but it's a hard life. Always traveling and those kinds of things. So I moved home. I moved home and I attended, I signed up for classes at Oglala Lakota College. I had my GED, so I was able to enroll, and I started studying my language. That was one of the, you know, a lot of the reasons why I moved home was to get an education, was to start learning my language, and get to know my community on a deeper level, you know, not just being there in the summer for events or for ceremonies, but being there full time and really getting to know my community on a deeper level. So I moved home, enrolled in classes, and it's funny because typically, you know, we hear stories from the reservation communities that people leave the res to get an education and then come back and help the people. And here I moved to the res to get an education. So it's kind of backwards, but it got me to where I'm at now, and I couldn't be more grateful. And attending OLC, the Oglala Lakota College where I work now, was my first time that I ever had Lakota classmates, first time I ever had a Lakota instructor. And first time I ever was really able to, have our own people and our own cultural concepts and things be the content of what we were learning in class. So it was a really good experience. Upon moving home, I did a lot of introspection and just wanted to strengthen all the connections that I have with my community, with my relatives. I met a lot of relatives that I didn't know about. I'd meet these elders and they'd say, your grandparents are my auntie and uncle, or, things like that. And then we'd establish those kinship terms with each other. And so moving home was a really big thing for me to just understand even more of where I came from and who I am and who I'm related to and these types of things. And then I found myself doing a lot of research about where our people come from, where we originate, or where we have migrated to or from, and our creation stories, things like that. I was really fascinated with those when I was in undergrad, and still am today. But anyways, I ended up needing to do an internship for my Lakota studies degree. And so I ended up interning in the archives at our college. And there I was doing all kinds of work like digitizing audio cassette tapes and translating different Lakota language documents, transcribing some of the interviews that I actually conducted with some of the elders. And some of those weren't even in English, but transcribing nonetheless, and also organizing some of the collections and cataloging things and labeling things more thoroughly than they were already. And in that process, somewhere down the line, I learned about a great great grandfather, who I had never really heard much about. And so Sam Tonkashila is the word for great grandfather. And then Iyewakie, actually, this is kind of interesting. So Iyewakie could mean I found my own, and it also could mean I became acquainted with. And so it kind of means both in this case, because I found out about my great grandfather Edgar FireThunder, and I also became acquainted with who he was and things like that. And I'd never heard any stories like that from my mom or anybody, because my grandpa Reuben FireThunder was actually not raised by his dad. And so because he wasn't raised by his dad, Peter FireThunder, he didn't know the rest of the FireThunders very well or very closely. And so I never, heard any of these stories about this grandpa of mine here. So this is my great grandpa Edgar FireThunder, and there was a younger Edgar FireThunder, I think, one of my grandpa's cousins. They named him after him. So this is the old one, and he was born around 1860. So this is a really good follow up to the last presentation, because as Ava said, when you look into the archives, you're gonna find you'll probably find some stuff with your relatives and your ancestors. And so that's kind of what this is about. So I found out about him, and I found some really cool stuff. So this is this isn't from APS, but this is from the Carlisle Indian School Digital Resource Center, who I think Brian put me in touch with. So shout out to Brian Carpenter. So yeah, I found out about him, and I started looking into him a little bit more. He drew this picture while attending the Carlisle boarding school. That's what there's pictures from. And Carlisle was the first boarding school to take children from Indian communities and force them into school, and it was there in Pennsylvania. And so my great grandpa Edgar was one of the first generation of students to attend. And so that picture was from there. This drawing is from there, and I actually intend on using this drawing for some like an album cover of sorts for if you see here, it's a courting ceremony is what he's drawing here. And we joke around and call this a snagging blanket nowadays, but there's this old type of song that's becoming I don't want to say it's becoming lost, but it's definitely becoming rare. And one of my late mentors, the late Kevin Locke, from Standing Rock, he played the flute, and he was a huge advocate for people learning that style of music. And he always encouraged me to learn those songs and keep them alive. And so I'd like to, at some point in the future, record a bunch of those songs that I've learned. Some of those I've learned from archives. Indiana University has a huge collection of Native music, and some of those are from there. And so, you know, this all kind of connects. But what I really wanted to get at today was focusing on this document here, which Brian Carpenter provided to me many years ago now, actually probably about 8 or 9 years ago. And so this is held by American Philosophical Society in the collections. And this was a documented by Ella Deloria, the famous Ella Deloria. I hope everybody knows who she is. If you don't, I highly recommend you looking her up. And there are not just things in Lakota, but much literature that she's written in English that I highly recommend. Water Lily is one. But anyway, she had actually sat down and interviewed my great-great-grandpa Edgar FireThunder when he was an old man at 1937, and wrote down everything that he said in Lakota. Then I don't have the pictures of it, but her method was, then she would do word for word translations, and then she would translate it a free translation where the grammar made sense in English. And that's a really nice resource because you can learn a lot of language because you can do the word for word, and then you can look at the free, like, what does this really mean in English? Because sometimes when you're just learning, your English brain is looking at your native language and you're like, how does this make sense? You know, sometimes it just doesn't compute. And so she really helped the way that she kept notes and documented things really helps you to navigate through those. But this was a really big piece to me, finding this and having access to this. And Brian didn't just share this with me after establishing that relationship. And I think they maybe already knew each other, but the entire Ella Deloria collection, or much of the Ella Deloria collection of Lakota materials, was then given to or shared with Oglala Lakota College archives. And so now OLC students have access to all that as well. And that's really important for both language, culture, and history, those fields. So I am now working on retranscribing these in the orthography that is most commonly taught and used throughout Lakota country. And that is, there's a couple, she was really meticulous, Ella Deloria, in writing Lakota and marking things. There was a couple things that she didn't mark. And so we mark those things today, like the difference between an aspirated sound and a guttural aspiration. And so, we mark those today, but she didn't, and that's okay. I understand the reasons why not. But so I'm working on retranscribing, and then hopefully I've had some good conversations and verbal agreements to publish these with the South Dakota Historical Society. And so we're working on getting these published so that they're accessible, not just scanned documents on old paper with these handwritten markings, but using those to create new materials that younger people feel like they can relate to and learn about the past and get a window into there. And maybe I'll have some other relatives that'll be excited to read some of the things that Edgar FireThunder talked about. So I want to talk about, I think I'm going over my time here, but real briefly.
Yeah, you got like a minute or so.
Okay, so real quick, this is a saying in our language, mitakuye oyasni, which is really common. It's like, even if you're not Lakota, you might have heard this before. And it means all of my relations, all of my relatives. And then these are two symbols that you've probably seen before. Even if not in Lakota country, these things they show up in other communities as well. And they're just really widely known. And so this is the medicine wheel, and this is what we call the gopemini, the hourglass. And I just want to talk about real quick is that these things, how I understand these symbols, is that they're three-dimensional. And so this is like a sphere, and then this one is supposed to be like an hourglass, a three-dimensional hourglass, and it twirls. And that's what gopemini means, is to twirl. And to me, what these things represent is Mitako Oyase, all my relatives. It's this one's the directions. You're addressing your relatives in all the directions. And that includes the heavens and down into the earth. And this one is supposed to be as above, so below. So up of it, whatever's going on in the heavens is happening here on earth. And so all that to say is that when we talk about how important kinship is in our culture, the family systems, knowing your relatives, to be Lakota, to be Dakota, we say it means to be a good relative. And part of being a relative, it doesn't end in time. It doesn't end in space. It goes beyond bloodlines. It goes beyond humanity. It goes beyond, time and who's living right now. So having the access to the archives have helped me to establish a stronger connection to my ancestors, specifically Edgar FireThunder. Now I know more about him, who he was, what he stood for, and better understanding of who I am and where I come from. And so that's, you're supposed to be at the center of this. And so that helps me understand where I am. And so
Alex, I'm so sorry. We really need to wrap up and make
okay.
sure we have enough time for today.
All right, the last thing I just wanted to end on is that none of that would be possible without archives sharing and returning documents and information that's been collected and data. And so I just want to give a big shout out to APS and Brian Carpenter and say Wopila Tonka Chichapi, and encourage anybody that's in any kind of position overseeing archives to help establish these relationships and strengthen relationships with Indigenous people. So there's no time for questions and comments, I'm sure, but you can put stuff in the chat and I'll be happy to answer any questions through there. Wopila anagop nankapi wopila chichapi.
Thank you so much, Alex. There was a round of applause that you can't hear in the digital space, but thank you so much for the beautiful presentation. We're going to switch it over. I'm going to make sure that both Alex and Ava are muted, and then we're going to switch over for our in-person presenters. And for that, I'll pass it over to our co-moderator, P.T. Anderson. Thank you.
All right, can you all hear me? Great. All right, perfect. I would like to welcome our next two speakers, Diana Hernández and Tzintia Montano Ramirez. I will start introducing Tzintia, and then Diana, I'll let you take it away. Tzintia Montano Ramirez is a PhD student in the linguistics program at UBC Berkeley. Her work focuses on the revitalization and documentation of her own heritage language, Daandavi, or Mixtec of Southern Pueblo, Mexico, where she works with children and bilingual teachers. She is also involved with the Chinantec diaspora in California to help them reclaim their language back and create an online community of learning. And Diana, do you want to do a quick intro?
Hello. So my name is Diana Hernández, and I am Chinantec from Oaxaca, Mexico. We can just stand up. Yeah.
Whichever you're
Okay.
comfortable with. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm gonna start again saying hi in my language. So, Unani, Cynthia Montano Ramirez, Yundui, Zandabi, Nyadabi, and Baancia. So, hola a todos, muchas gracias por estar aquí presentes. Soy Cynthia Montano Ramirez, soy Mixteca, and hello everyone, I'm Cynthia Montano Ramirez. I'm Mixtec, I'm from Mexico. I'm an international student at UC Berkeley, and and this is my friend. Oh, yeah.
Kane, Halengna, Niasi, Dian. Hola a todos, mi nombre es Diana Hernández. Soy chinanteca de Oaxaca, Mexico. Hi everyone, my name is Diana Hernández, and I am Chinantec from Oaxaca, Mexico. And our presentation today is on utilizing published legacy materials of Chinantec, particularly the variety of Santiago Comaltepec used in a online diaspora micro-community of learning. Next slide.
Yeah. So, well, a little presentation of me more. I'm doing linguistic work with my own language, as we were saying. I'm focusing on the documentation and revitalization in situ of Dandabi, Mixtec of Southern Puebla. And I began my journey with my grandma in the picture present. And then I continue building a community with bilingual teachers to create an online dictionary, soon to be published. So yeah, my story starts with me not knowing that my grandma actually was a speaker of the language. She's 84 years old, and she's the youngest generation in my community. So she introduced me to the neighboring community that also speak Mixtec, and then I get to know other people who speak the language, that they are a little bit younger, 60 years old. They are the youngest speaker in the other community. And in the other picture, we are there working this summer for creating our online language dictionary.
And then just a little bit of background about me. I was born in Oaxaca, Mexico, but at the age of 2, my mom, she grew up working in the field, so harvesting maize and coffee during the seasons. And she had a bad harvest season, so she had also been hearing about a large populations of Oaxacan people moving to California particularly. So I was only 2.5 years old, and she decided, I think it's time. So I grew up in Los Angeles, California. Scroll down. And my mother, actually, she didn't teach me Chinantec. So she used it only in conversations with my aunts, or when she didn't want me to know what she was talking about. But I grew up hearing about it, and I was like, oh, okay, I can decipher a few words that she knows, when she's saying goodbye, for example, or when she refers to me and she'll say hyung, and it's kid. So I really grew up just speaking Spanish at home and English in school. She thought I would face prejudice speaking an indigenous language, and also that it'd be harder for me to actually learn English. And although the language aspect was missing, we did keep the other cultural roots, so the typical foods that we eat. So here we have a tlayuda and what we call tejate, which is a drink made of cacao. The next slide. And also going to the celebrations in community. So here we have the captain and the sergeants, as we call them, with their attire. And then on the right side, we have the bull. So if this event was happening in Oaxaca, they would have fireworks and things like that. But here we have it in just sparklers. But this is in the celebrations, we have these, and we kind of invite everybody to join the social dance. Next.
Well, everything started because I started my program in 2020 from Mexico, and I moved here in 2021, meaning USA. So I wanted to connect with people, at least, I was familiar with, because new environment and everything. And then I got to know the Oaxaca Grassroots Students Organization, and they are undergrad students from first generation Oaxacan here at UC Berkeley. So we started in 2021 with Oaxaca seminar, and we review some of the historical and cultural aspects of Oaxaca, also languages and everything. So after that seminar, I decided to launch a program, language revitalization program about how to explore the language from other Oaxacan people here. So in my own journey, I started I'm gonna learn Mixtec, with knowing that Mixtec it's only a name for a number of other languages. So trying to make for them easier to go through their own journey. That's why I started with this program, and then Diana.
Yeah, so I was actually doing my undergrad at University of California, San Diego, and I'm more in the STEM, so I got my Bachelor's of Science in Bioengineering. But I know I wanted to reclaim my language. I forgave my mom for not having taught me that, but I did want to learn it and not lose it within our family history. So I was looking for resources online, and I was thankful to find Oaxacal. And thankfully they opened it not just at UC Berkeley, but expanded it to anybody in the UC system, and then across any student across the US diaspora. Next. So the goals of our collaboration were, one, to be able to bridge this gap between the materials that are available. A few of them in Chinantec, specifically of Santiago Comaltepec, that are published in the Summer Institute of Linguistics. Being able to, how do we study using these materials and learn to speak it? Secondly, to be able to understand the basic characteristics of language, like animacy and tone. And lastly, be able to evaluate how to adapt these resources within our online community and future efforts. So non-Oaxacan people, rare amounts that I meet them, they'll probably know Oaxaca because it's the capital of mezcal. So they probably gone to do mezcal tasting, or some people who go for forest biodiversity research, or because of the Guelaguetza celebration that's pretty large now. But Oaxaca is actually very linguistically diverse as well. So here we have Mixteca Baja, which would be Tzintia's expertise, and then Chinantec, which is more close to Veracruz, if you can see there, and then particularly Houma, Chinantec de la Sierra, of the mountain range in Santiago Comaltepec, and it's just a little picture here of the region, very within the mountains.
Yeah, well, it's worth to mention that Mixtec and Chinantec, they both belong to the Otomangan family, so they are sharing this tonal, tonal system, both of them, and that's why we start okay, let's review what is there outside, what is out there for Chinantec language. And next, please. So a little bit of statistics for Santiago Comaltepec. So it is a municipality of 1,157 inhabitants located in the district of Ixtlan, Oaxaca, Mexico. There are about 899 Chinantec speakers, about 70% of the total population. And according to the National Institute of Languages, Indigenous Languages in Mexico, the language is labeled as not immediate risk of disappearance. However, it's Chinantec still is the dominant language in most of Chinantec Comaltepec municipality, but there is a large shift towards Spanish going on right now because of we have the education system still in Spanish, medical system, medical care is in Spanish, and political life outside community is also Spanish. So there is a lot of pressure for Spanish and these language shifts going on right now. And there is documentation available online. We have a grammar, dictionary, and text made by the SIL during the 70s. And however, this is the context in Mexico. In USA, the first generation migrants don't share the same experience abroad as Diana was mentioned right now. And next slide, please.
This is an overview of the different roles that each of us played within this project. So myself being the language learner, like I mentioned before, I heard my mom how she would pronounce things, but I just kind of thought this is going to be really difficult. And I've had this opportunity of getting to be more familiar with the grammar and how to actually pronounce things. And my end goal would be to essentially be able to make materials more user-friendly for beginner language learners. And then my uncle, whose initials are RG, being the language expert, who shows us really how to pronounce the words. So the way we go about this is based on the materials that we have, I would ask him, how would you say this phrase, this word, this sentence? And then he would say it, and we would kind of try to cross-match based on the available materials. And then
Yeah, and in my role, well, I facilitate navigation of the linguistic materials. You know, there is a lot of linguistic terms and jargons in the grammars and everything, and I try to explain the topics that need explanation, like tones, animacy, and other grammar topics. I also working with this collection, impact the type of content and formal and the format of my linguistic documentation project for my own community in the way of, okay, I'm documenting my language and how I'm gonna make it more accessible for future generations. So this is like the experience that I'm gaining from this project too. And next slide, please. And well, the documentation available that we have is, this is an example, the dictionary. Even though they started in the 70s with all the compilation of data, this is the first electronic edition, 2021 and 2018. And you can see in the dictionary, we have like a lot of colors because they are trying to be easier for learners and speakers. And well, in the writing system, we're gonna see also. Then there is the tones are written outside the word, which this is also the kind of explanation that I have to make, like reading through the materials and also how they explain in the orthographic system made by the SIL. And also, Diana has an interesting anecdote when we were reviewing these materials.
Yeah, so when I had first reached out to my uncle, well, for one, he was like, why are you trying to learn? Like, people are just gonna like start speaking Spanish from now on, like, what's the point? But then when I like just like, showed him, like, I'm really enthusiastic, like, I see this, like, I have to do this. I had asked him if he by any chance had heard about people in the community, like any researchers who were documenting, and he had said that way back when he had heard that there was some Americans who were going about asking people like, hey, would you be able to help us with this project? And he had said that their name was Ehut. And I was like, wait, like what does that translate to like Spanish, right? And it was like, Judy, como así. And I was like, oh, wait, like that's actually one of the compilators of the text, Judith. He didn't know the last name. They kind of just referred to as Ehut. But yeah, it was really interesting to know that little, like, they almost crossed paths. Yeah.
And the next one, please. And well, we have the abecedario also made by the SIL, which is based in Spanish, as we can see in the use of C and Q there for the velar sound, and also the use of ñ and all of this. So, and next slide, please. So when I was, well, we are both reviewing this chart. I think about, well, maybe we need to connect with the people in Mexico, what they are doing for the writing system. So we connect with Vilma, a bilingual Chinantec teacher in the community, and yeah, she explained us that they are changing for example, the nasality in the SIL writing system. It's marked with on the script below the vowels, but they were using the like accents to mark the nasality. Also, the C and Q is changing for the K symbol. So this is a little bit of how we were starting changing the way we are using the writing system proposed by the SIL. And the next slide, please. That one. Yeah.
So working via Zoom posed a challenge because in Oaxaca, at least where Vilma is, there's a lot of like technical difficulties, like connectivity mainly being the issue. But so we didn't get to work with Vilma as often, also like the time difference and things like that. But we did obtain these resources additionally from her. So it's like the vocabulary in Chinantec that they have been working on, and then as well as this short story that goes on to like the numbers and just like kind of like a tale that she had translated within the community. So now we have these additional resources and more up to date, I think, with how Chinantec is going to be used forward. Next. So this was then our culminating like adaptation of the writing system. So in the first column, the proposed that was by the SIL, And then in the second column, hours, and the more like up-to-date, based on like conversations with Vilma as well. The third column being an example in Chinantec, and then the last column being like a Spanish and English translation. So here are just like a couple of examples. The letters D and Z, which actually make the like G sound. So here for dog, it'd be like G, and then Ja-ing for drunk. So the way I kind of went about like in this situation, like English actually helped me in this process because the sound is more so like ginger, right? So being able to, in my personal notes, add those like, oh, this is what it's gonna sound like, and it helped with just practicing and memorizing as well. And then once again, the C and the Q that has been dropped and just as K. So here, kung for money. Next slide.
Well, a little bit of tones. We also go review just the surface of the tones. And there are 6 tones in total in Chinantec. There are 3 level tones, low, medium, high, and 3 contour tones, low, medium, medium, high, and low, high. And well, we work with this. This is like they are explained in the grammar. And for our purposes of exploring, we use the next slide, minimal pairs, to explain these phonetic features. Also tones, but also nasal and oral consonants, and the glottal stop that for Diana was like, oh, this is new for me. So we also go through the glottal stops, aspiration, and all different quality vowels that we have. So we spent like several sessions with her uncle just to pronounce it, so we can get to know how it sounds and practice the pronunciation of those. And next slide, please. And the other feature that we reviewed was animacy. Chinantec has this characteristic feature about an agreement with the subject and the noun, which is, in this case, we have 2 examples here. Orange as he, which is inanimate, and wasp, he. This is the same. It's the same word, but in the colors we try to mark how the morphemes and the other ways of numerals and adjectives change according to the animacy of the word. So in the first case, for orange, we have katoko, hine, I, fe. And in the second one, we have, for wasp, we have katong, hang, hi, neng, fen, I, fen. So we can see the nasality plays a role in the differentiation between animate and inanimate morphemes and other words. And the next one, please.
So super briefly, we kind of made this like chart of how to easily be able to categorize inanimate versus animate. And we also like afterward played around with these words, like next slide, making sentences and adding a little bit of complexity at each step. So for example, here comparing in 1 and 2, just singular versus plural inanimate. So a versus all, con versus hale. And then 3 and 4, singular versus plural for an animate object. And then 5 and 6, here now we're like, okay, now we're adding the verb for an inanimate versus animate object. And then like 7 and 8, using a different verb now, fell, again for like an inanimate versus animate. Next.
Well, for the future of the project, from my linguistic lens, as we call, I think about how to approach for the grammar topics, the one that we saw in a more didactic way, tone and animacy, discuss the writing system, how to mark in tones, marking nasality, what kind of symbols we will use for different vowels. Developing a writing system requires a community agreement, how we're gonna go also working with community in Oaxaca. And the keyboard adapted to Chinantec writing system. And the most important, I will say, is language documentation focused on daily communication, because right now it's hard grammar.
And then from a more like communal aspect, I want to definitely bring in more members that want to learn Chinantec. within the diaspora, for example, in Los Angeles, where we have a large Chinantec population, and potentially from the Bay Area as well. And then once again, try with people back in the community in Mexico, see if we could like somehow find a solution for like the connectivity issues, and also like adapt these materials for children. I think like I want people my age to be able to learn the language, but also teach the younger folks as well. And naturally, just like being able to, this will help like practicing more often. We also want to reach out to the organization Comunidades Indígenas en Liderazgo, Cielo, which is a indigenous women-led nonprofit organization that helps different communities, not just Chinantec, but mainly like Zapotec, Mixtec within LA. And now that we are here at APS, I definitely had not heard about these resources before, so we're gonna think about like exploring those as well.
And well, the last one, we met in June 2024, and I was working from Bay Area, Diana was in Boston, and her uncle was in LA, so I finally met them in person there, and we made some good quality recordings, not over Zoom, because Zoom is a little bit hard to work with. And well, the last one, and that's it. And
Mamba,
gracias, thank you.
Thank you so much to Diana and Tzintia, and also all of our other speakers. Unfortunately, we are quite a bit over, so we do not have time for immediate Q&A. I do encourage you to find the speakers at lunch or hop on Zoom to ask online. There'll also be a discussion later this afternoon where we can bring in more questions as well. So thank you so much again. Let's give all our speakers another round of applause.